More than 500,000 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine have been delayed for Canada, and another 1.5 million are up in the air as to who can or should get it. To talk about this in more detail is our political reporter, Brian Lilley, joining us once again from Toronto. Now, Brian, this is probably not what Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was envisioning for our vaccine rollout.
No, not at all, nor the premiers who are now scrambling to try and figure out what to do. It's a bit of a headache. I mean, we started out the week with, all right, we're going to get 3.3 million doses this week. Oh, this is great. It's going to be the biggest delivery that we've ever seen. And look, I want that to happen. We need it to happen to get back to normal. But about just shy of 600,000 of those doses of Moderna, they're not showing up this week. They were originally supposed to show up last week. Then they got put off to March 30th, the Tuesday of this week. Then it was, no, we'll do it April 1st, the Thursday of this week. And now it is, sometime between April 5th and 7th, they will arrive. So there's a delay there. That's not good news. We're having to cancel a lot of appointments. They're closing clinics. There was the Canada's Wonderland, the amusement park north of Toronto that I'm sure you went to roller coasters on, Hal. They had a drive-through clinic open up. That opened only on Monday. It's shutting down on Friday because of a lack of Moderna. And you could say, okay, but we're getting the AstraZeneca in. And we'll talk about, questions around that in a moment and who can or should get it. But it's arrived in Canada, but we can't distribute it until the plants that it was made at in the United States or the doses themselves have gone through quality control testing by Health Canada. Neither of those things could happen. So it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks before that's distributed. So the good news is we've got just over 1 million doses of Pfizer, but the provinces are gobbling that up. They're hungry for it. So we went from 3.3 million doses arriving this week to really just about 1.1 million doses arriving. And that is a big drop for a country that is desperate to get itself vaccinated to the point where we can all get back to normal.
And see what that normal looks like. Brian, the Prairie provinces have suspended the use of the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine for those under the age of 55. And I'm guessing the suspension is because health officials are concerned about the rare blood clots which came up with the use of the vaccine in Europe?
Yeah, and I find this very strange that NACI and Health Canada decided to do it. I see this as something that is going to help create more vaccine hesitancy because they said it was safe. Then they're saying, okay, well, we're not sure. Are you going to want to take that? At one point we had Health Canada saying it was good for people over 65 and NACI, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, saying, no, it's not. And they were at odds. These are two big federal bodies who are filled with doctors, and you've got groups of federal doctors arguing over the safety of a vaccine. It's kind of happening again on this front surrounding the blood clots, but started with Prince Edward Island, moved across the prairies. Now it's a federal recommendation, and nobody's giving it to anyone under 55. The blood clot issue, Hal, a couple of rare cases. I mean, there have literally been millions of doses of AstraZeneca administered around the world, and a couple of cases of women of childbearing age getting blood clots. Well, this is not an uncommon thing. In fact, as I pointed out in a column in the Toronto Sun, the fact is that women of childbearing age can get blood clots without being on any medications. It is just something that happens, and the numbers for that just happening naturally are higher than from taking the AstraZeneca vaccine. Taking the birth control pill puts you at a risk of between 3 and 5 people out of every 10,000 are likely to develop blood clots. Pregnancy, it's between 5 and 20 people out of every 10,000 are likely to develop blood clots. They're saying it's either between 1 in 100,000 or 1 in 1 million. There's disagreement on the science on that. Are likely to develop blood clots from taking the AstraZeneca vaccine. That doesn't mean it's deadly. And yet they've just said no one under 55 take it. It's going to slow down the vaccination of the country. It's going to scare a lot of people needlessly. I mean, taking the birth control pill and getting pregnant are things that a lot of women do, right across this country all the time. And nobody tells them, oh, you shouldn't do that. You're going to die, even though the risk is much higher than this vaccine.
I wonder how much it's impacted company stock as well. And health officials have been talking about putting a warning label on the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine as well. Now, Brian, for those who are wanting the COVID-19 vaccine, Pfizer is moving up doses from the summer into June. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this is good news, but it's delayed good news. And I don't blame the federal government, the Trudeau government, from saying, oh, look, we're getting more doses. So we were supposed to get 5 million doses of Pfizer. Well, we're supposed to get more than that, but there's a block of 5 million doses that they were able to say, instead of delivering that between June and September, we're going to give it to you in June. So, sorry, between July and September, we were going to get it. Now we'll get it in June. That's good news. Even better news, we could start seeing some doses. I'm going to expect that it will be limited at the beginning. Some doses of the Johnson & Johnson single-shot vaccine, they're saying possibly by the end of April. So that's just a month away. If that comes on board, that's very good news because, you know, we're having shipment problems with Moderna. There's still the possibility that Moderna or Pfizer could be shut down due to European Union export blockages or export blockages out of India. There's a lot of problems in the way. We need whatever vaccine we can get that's safe and effective for Canadians.
Brian, Easter's just around the corner, a time to reflect on the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross for our sins and to celebrate his resurrection. Now, many times we do that with friends and family going to church, but our Prime Minister is telling us not to get together with family this Easter. Is it really feasible to keep people locked down, Brian? Many people I speak to say, you know what, we're fed up. We've had enough.
Yeah, and I think that is the feeling of a lot of people, even people who are cautious and who say, oh no, I want the restrictions in place, but they don't want it to mean that they can't do anything or that they can't see family or that they can't go to church. You know, they finally opened up churches here in Toronto, and at first it was 10 people. Now, I've got a church across the street from me that can hold 600 to 700 people, and they were told 10. Well, they finally got it up to 15%. And there are different, you know, places throughout the country dealing with things like that. As you approach Easter, it's very difficult from a spiritual perspective, from a mental health perspective. So I think to a degree, people are going to start making their own decisions and saying, okay, I know what the government's telling me, but I'm fine taking this risk. And maybe they go and visit their grandkids or their parents or, you know, get together with cousins, what have you. You know, that is most likely going to be a safe thing as long as we're not spreading it to people who are vulnerable. I was talking to one public health expert who has been very strong in favor of lockdowns, and he said, and in the past, a stay-at-home order, and he said, you know what we need now, Brian? We need a stay-outside order. He said, people are fed up, they're through, but you know what? With the weather getting better, we can get outside as much as you can, follow protocols, still be careful, but have a barbecue. Go to a restaurant patio where you're properly distanced from other people. We need to be able to get outside. I think that's where a lot of people are at right now.
Absolutely. We need that fresh air, get together with our friends and family in a safe way and enjoy what God has given us. Absolutely. Brian, a stunning new report from the Auditor General of Canada says that our country was not prepared for the COVID-19 pandemic and did not assess the risk properly. The investigation revealed that we also did not use proper quarantining methods.
Yeah, the two big takeaways from this was the risk assessment, where between February 2nd and February 28th, we weren't updating how we were assessing the risk of COVID-19 to Canada. So we had our first case show up that we knew about it. January 25th, it was announced. January 27th, it was confirmed. Shortly thereafter, cases showing up in British Columbia, then in Quebec, and then across the rest of the country. And they were showing up 1 and 2 at a time, and then there was a lull, and then we started getting cases from Iran and from Germany, and then eventually the United States. Well, the way the auditors explained it was the Public Health Agency of Canada was just saying, okay, how many cases do we have now? Oh, we're good. Not, oh, we're bringing in more, and this could potentially spread. They weren't looking at the potential for spread and the potential for how this could spread the way it had in other countries. And so up until the middle of March, up until days before we all went into a lockdown, federal health officials and politicians and their provincial counterparts, by the way, were all saying, based on Public Health Agency of Canada data, oh, the risk to Canadians is low. Turns out that was a big lie, a big problem, and it cost an awful lot of lives. When we finally brought in quarantining of people coming into the country on March 25th, 2 months after the first case arrived by air, well, we weren't properly following up. Between the middle of May and June, There were more than 108,000 people who came into Canada and they had no idea whether they were quarantining properly. And when they sent out police to follow up on 40% that they knew were not quarantining properly, 83% of the time they didn't know what the outcome. They told the cops, go check on them, because they couldn't get a hold of them by phone or the people weren't checking in. 83% of those cases, which is more than 15,000, they don't know what the cops did. They don't know what the cops found. They could have found the person was not at home. They could have found the person was following the rules. We simply don't know. And you can't have that while also claiming our quarantine system is keeping us safe.
Brian, the Trudeau Liberals have told us we must spend 3 days in a quarantine hotel and a total of 14 days under quarantine if we leave the country and then come on back. But you know what? That doesn't apply to NHL players. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this started to become a thing with the NHL trade deadline happening soon, and I'm sure you'll be watching to see how many of your Flames get sent out of the Saddle Dome off to greener pastures somewhere else, Hal.
Yeah.
But there was a player originally from Thunder Bay, Ontario, up near the Manitoba border, a guy named Eric Stahl. He got traded from the Buffalo Sabres to the Montreal Canadiens. Oh, okay, wait a minute. He's coming in from an American team. What are the rules here? It took a long time for Public Health Agency of Canada to admit it, but then one of those things, 6 o'clock as the bureaucrats head home, they send out the email confirming what we already knew and what NHL owners and managers have been told. Don't worry, the regular rules don't apply. No 3 days in a hotel, no bag with a rotten banana and a bad sandwich in it, no $2,000 bill at the end. It is a 7-day quarantine period. Now, they are, subject to regular testing. In some cases, it's daily, but it's at least 4 tests within that week to show that they are COVID-free before they're allowed to show up for training practice or training camp with the team or to play. But, those rules could apply here. There was the pilot project in Calgary to get people out of quarantine earlier with a test when you land, a test 5 days later. You've got to show negative. The project was going well, but the feds canceled it rather than expand it. And they brought in this mandatory test when you land and then 3 days in a hotel and a $2,000 bill. So I think it will sit funny with an awful lot of Canadians who are just saying, we should have one set of rules for all. That tends to be our way. Some hockey fans have gotten in touch with me and said, you're out of your mind. Hockey players are great. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have these rules. I'm saying if it's good enough for the NHL, should be good enough for the rest of us.
Brian, a story we covered extensively here on Bridge City News was how the Supreme Court of Canada says Justin Trudeau's carbon tax is constitutional and how the premiers, especially here in the West, are not happy about it. You say this recent decision could lead to a federal takeover of provincial powers?
Well, that's effectively what this was, and that's what the federal government argued for in this. They ordered that the tax, or as they call it, a price on carbon, was constitutional under the Peace, Order and Good Government Clause of the Constitution. Kind of a catch-all that doesn't really, in my mind, you can twist that to mean whatever you want. And I wasn't alone in this. I know it was a majority decision, but it was also a split decision. 6 justices sided with the federal government, 3 sided with the provinces. And they said this is a real concern for them. Justice Cote out of Quebec was very clear on this. Justice Brown out of Alberta, very clear on this as well. They were concerned that the way that the tax was found constitutional could be used in the future. So let's say there's a national interest. Right now, the Prime Minister is very big on national standards for long-term care facilities. And if he decides there's a national interest in this, he can use similar legislation to encroach on provincial jurisdiction and say that federal rules will apply to long-term care facilities in every province and territory, and then use the same playbook to take it before the courts. It's very worrisome to me. I spoke to Premier Kenney and Premier Moe during their respective news conferences last week. They both expressed dismay at their decision on a number of fronts, including what it could mean for the future of the Constitution.
Brian, we only have about a minute left here. I want to talk to you about some of the controversy surrounding the ousting of Governor General Julie Payette. There's one senator who says we need to end the practice of paying for their expenses once they leave office. Tell me more about that.
Senator Claude Carnegan, a conservative out of Quebec, says, you know what? It's time to end this. These guys can get up to $100,000 a year for all kinds of office supports to book travel if they're going to speak as a former governor general, or to arrange their papers. And this can go on for years to come. So Julie Payette is eligible for this, even though she was effectively fired from the job. And some governors general have been seen to abuse this in the past. So he says it's time to end this. I think if there's a way to help them organize their papers that will go to the archives, that's fine. But we don't need to have a private secretary for the GG at $100,000 a year after they've left office.
I could handle $100,000 a year, especially after I leave office. This office, my office here at work. One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley with the Toronto Sun. Thanks again for your time today, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.